Hi, everybody. This is Elizabeth from the library. Thank you for being here. I know it's very quiet, so I wanted to say hello to everybody who's attending. Just to let you know, this is a webinar, so we cannot see you or hear you. If you'd like to ask a question, please go to the chat and make sure you choose all panelists and attendees, and we can answer any questions from there. Thanks, everybody. I see that Liz has her hand raised. If you want to ask a question in the chat, we can respond. Thanks. No, Liz, you won't see anything yet because we haven't started. You perhaps see a welcome screen. Once we get started, you will see Coach Toni in her kitchen cooking up some delicious stuff for us. We're going to give people just a couple more minutes to come into the room and then we'll get started. Some people are asking if they should cook while Coach Toni is cooking. It's really up to you. You can cook while she's cooking, or you can just watch and then cook for yourself once it's over. The recipes are on our Facebook page for the event. I will repost the link and we'll get started in just a minute or so. Okay, Coach Toni, are you ready to go?
Yeah, we're ready to go over here.
Okay, I'm gonna. I think you have to start your video.
Okay, 1 minute.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Welcome, Coach Toni.
Woo.
We're ready.
Hi.
Anyway.
I hope you guys are all staying dry because it all of a sudden started to pour and hail. Let's hope the power stays on. That'd be a great thing. I hope you're all also staying safe through all these crazy times. If anybody's an essential worker, frontline worker, thank you so much for everything that you guys are doing for us. And hopefully things will go back to normal soon. Today we're going to be making some brownies as well as some pizza. Who doesn't love all of that? So we're going to start with the brownies first. Make sure your oven is preheated at 350 because we want to make sure it's ready to go when the brownie batter is ready. I'm using an 8x8 pan. Anything similar to that size is good. Not really too particular about that. We're going to spray our pan. Super, super important. We're also going to line the bottom of it with parchment paper. That just ensures it that it's going to come up and not stick. So when we are going to cut our parchment paper to fit. So what I like to do is you lay the parchment paper down, and then you just put your pan right on top of it. And then you take a pen, marker, whatever you've got, and you just outline the pan onto the parchment. And then you take a scissor and you cut out your little square. And then we have the perfect shape for our pan. So brownie batter, as most of you probably know, is super sticky. So I like to do a layer of spray, then press down the parchment, and then another layer. When you guys are using this spray, it is super important that you do not spray it over the floor. It can make the floor very slippery, and we don't want anybody getting hurt while we're having fun baking. So spray it over a sink, spray it over the garbage. So I'm just going to spray it over my sink over here. So like I said, we're going to do a layer of the grease. Make sure your parchment paper is pressed down. And then another layer of the grease. Make sure you got all the edges as well. We don't want anything sticking. Okay, looks good. So we're just going to set that aside, and then we'll start our brownie batter. All you need is one bowl and a spatula. You can use a spoon. Not really too particular about the item you use to mix it. You just got to get a mix. So we have everything on this lovely tray over here for our brownies. I'm just going to read the recipe off super quick, and then we'll get started. It's half a cup of vegetable oil. If you don't have vegetable oil, you can use canola oil or corn oil. You just really don't want to use olive oil as a replacement for it. A cup of white sugar, 2 eggs, a teaspoon of vanilla, or any flavor that works well with chocolate. So if you really like mint, you can use some mint extract in it. That would be kind of cool. A third of a cup of cocoa powder, half a cup of flour, a fourth of a teaspoon of salt, and a fourth of a teaspoon of baking powder. So we're first going to add our oil and our sugar. So I already measured out the oil. It's a little easier. That goes in. And then 1 cup of sugar. So at the baking coach, making it a little easier on ourselves to level it out, you take a really, really big scoop of sugar. If I can get it. There we go. So it's over the edges, and then we use a popsicle stick. You could use the back of a knife, really anything that's straight and flat. And all we do is just it will help flatten it out so you get 1 perfect cup.
Toni, quick question. Somebody's asking us how much oil. Could you repeat that?
It's half a cup of oil. So we have our sugar and oil, and before we add anything else, we're going to mix it up. Just till it's combined. Make sure all of the sugar is incorporated in there. Nothing crazy, just all mixed in. So then we're going to add our eggs and our vanilla. Our vanilla is just 1 teaspoon here. Whenever you're measuring things like vanilla or salt or anything that can go into like teaspoon, tablespoon, you don't want to measure it over the bowl like this. Because if it goes over, all that extra is going to go in the bowl that you don't want. So you could do it over like a separate cup, even over the counter if you don't mind cleaning it up if you spill it. So we're just going to do a tablespoon of vanilla. And then when it comes to the eggs, it's a similar situation. I always crack it into a separate bowl, cup, something, just so if you get any shells, you don't get it enough, don't have to dig it out. Makes it a little easier. So it's 2 eggs. There's 1. And then once you get those two things in there, you can mix those in. Just gonna wipe my counter because I got a little vanilla.
Tony, we just have another quick question. Michelle would like to know, did you say tablespoon or teaspoon of vanilla?
It's a teaspoon. Okay, got that cleaned up. So we're just gonna break up our egg yolks and then mix it in until everything is incorporated. Okay, that looks just about good. Just make sure it's all combined, it all looks the same. You don't want any excess egg whites hanging out over there. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna add is the cocoa powder. Another little easy trick when it comes to cocoa powder is, let me just get this. Most cocoa powders come in like these sort of containers, and it's very hard to get like our 1/3 scoop in there. A lot of the times you try to scoop it and then you end up covered in cocoa powder, and that's not fun. So what I like to do is I'll pour some cocoa powder just into a wider bowl so it's a lot easier to get that clean scoop. So then we're adding 1/3 of a cup. So just like the sugar, I like to use the popsicle stick to just make it flat and perfect. And then we're going to add that to our bowl. Before we add the rest of the dry ingredients, I just like to get the cocoa powder incorporated just so it's evenly distributed. Make sure when you're mixing, you're really scraping the sides of the bowls as well as the bottom so there's not excess egg down there or oil. So when you pour it in your pan and you get like little egg whites on the top of your brownies, and that's very gross.
Toni, have you added the flour yet?
Not yet, just the
Okay.
cocoa powder after the eggs, and then we're gonna mix it in before adding the flour. Okay. And that is all mixed in. So now we're gonna go forward and add the salt, the baking powder, and the flour. I like to add the baking powder and salt before I dump the flour on top, just to make sure those little bits of ingredients can get like incorporated and they don't get like thrown out of the bowl when you're trying to mix the flour in. Salt and baking powder are very important when it comes to baking. So both of them are 1/4 of a teaspoon. We have our salt here, and like I said, don't measure it right over the bowl just in case you have any excess. And make sure, especially with baking powder, you want to make sure the little scoop is level. Put that in there. And now we're just going to add our flour, which is only 1/2 cup. We want to make sure it's level, like everything else.
We got another question from Karen asking if you sift the powder and the flour.
I don't sift the flour for this unless you look at your flour and see that there's a lot of lumps and chunks, then you can go ahead and sift it, but mine looks pretty good. You can just mix it up a little beforehand. It's not really a big deal when it comes to brownies. Just make sure it's well incorporated. And then you can go ahead and stir, making sure to scrape bottom and sides. It might seem a little tricky at first and might look like it's not all incorporating well, but it will get there if you keep going. And this is a thicker brownie batter, so if you're looking at yours and you're like, oh my gosh, this is not right, this is way too thick, you're probably fine. Okay, so it is all incorporated. There's no extra flour on the sides or on the bottom. So we are ready to go. Now we're going to bring back our pan from the beginning. And all you do use your spatula or your spoon to scrape it all into the pan. You don't want to miss any brownie batter. You don't want to leave any behind. And then with that same spatula or spoon, you're just going to make sure it's all spread out to each corner so it'll bake evenly. And then we're going to bake it. It's at 350 for 25 to 30 minutes. So I'm just going to set mine in the oven. And then I'm just going to set a timer on my phone just so I don't forget. That's super important. There's sometimes I'm like, I don't need a timer, I'll be fine. And then something's burning in the oven. I'm like, oh no. So now I just always know to do it, put it aside just so you don't forget about anything. So now we're going to switch over to pizza. So I'm just going to put this on the counter and bring my next tray over. When I went to culinary school, I think the one thing that I learned that will always stay with me is clean as you go. It makes it a lot easier at the end of the night when you don't have such a big mess. So just always make sure you're wiping your table, and it'll make it a lot easier at the end. So for pizza dough, there's not that many ingredients to it, which is nice. It's very simple. So I'm just going to start off with reading the recipe for the pizza dough. It's 1 1/4 cup warm water, about 100 degrees. Now, when you're measuring out the water, you don't want it to be burning hot. Our body temperature is about 100 degrees, so it's warm to the touch. You don't want it super hot, or that will kill the yeast, and then it won't activate, won't rise. 1 tablespoon of dry active yeast. Looks like this little powder. If you don't have yeast, it's kind of a hard thing to substitute, but I was reading online that if you do baking soda as well as an acid in place of that, it will work. So, and the ratio is 2 to 1. So if you have 2 teaspoons of yeast, you would use 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of an acid. An acid can be anything from lemon juice or buttermilk, anything that will activate that baking soda to act as the yeast and make the dough rise. We also have a tablespoon of sugar. I'll explain in a little while why we're using sugar in pizza dough. And we also have 1/4 cup of olive oil. And then we have flour, which is 3 1/4 cup, and a teaspoon of salt. Very simple. So we're going to start in a large bowl. We're going to pour our water. And then we are going to measure our yeast. Just need to grab a tablespoon from here. So we have 1 tablespoon of yeast. You can just shake that. It's very easy to get it level. And then 1 tablespoon of sugar. Now we're just going to
Coach Toni, I got a comment on YouTube, and the gentleman says he can't get yeast. Do you have any suggestions on what we could use for pizza dough instead of yeast?
Yeah, so if you don't have yeast, I know it's very hard to get right now. I've tried. You can use the baking soda and an acid, and it's a 2 to 1 ratio. So if you're using, like we're using in this recipe, a tablespoon of dry active yeast, you would use 1/2 of a tablespoon of baking soda and then 1/2 of a tablespoon of an acid, which can be like lemon juice, lime juice, buttermilk. We have a few options there. So now that we have our water, yeast, and our sugar in here, I like to use the little craft sticks, but you can use a spoon. Just mix it together just so incorporate it a little bit. And then we just have to wait a few minutes just so the yeast activates. And the purpose of the sugar in here, the sugar is food to the yeast. It will make it activate a lot faster, and it'll help that process along. If you don't use the sugar, it will eventually activate, but you'll probably have to wait like 15 minutes opposed to just like 3, 4, 5 minutes here. It really doesn't take that long, especially that warm water also pushes it along. If you use cold water, it'll take a while. And like I said before, if it's way too hot, it'll just kill the yeast altogether. And we don't want that. It'll get a little foamy, and that's how you know when it's going to be ready. Like mine's starting to foam already, and it probably hasn't even been a minute. That's the help of that sugar. So the pizza we're making today, it might be a little too big to fit on like a normal cookie sheet as like a round pizza. So you could always make it square, rectangle, oblong shape that really, you don't even know what it is, whatever you want. I might even split mine into 2 pieces, and you can make 2 smaller pizzas that are completely round. It's really up to you guys. Okay, it looks like we are ready to go over here already. So the next thing we're going to add.
Show us what it looks like in your bowl.
It is really not that pretty.
Oh, no, it's not. Okay.
So we're going to go ahead and add our next ingredients here. When I'm measuring oil, we're going to be doing 3 tablespoons of oil in here. I like to pour the oil into something else and then scoop it out, so you're not sitting there like trying to measure it, trying not to get it all over. Just makes it a little easier. You can always pour the extra back into the container. So we're just going to add 3 of these tablespoons into our bowl. There we go. And then we need, let me grab my salt. We need a teaspoon of salt. Salt is super duper important when it comes to baking anything. It will enhance the flavor of everything you make. So like we put it in those brownies, it'll really enhance and bring out that chocolate flavor. In here, pizza dough really doesn't taste like anything. So it'll help us out, and it'll activate that yeast even more. We're gonna have to set it aside to rest for about 20, 30 minutes. And in that resting time, that's when the salt comes out, and it'll help the yeast and help the rising process of the dough. So now
someone was asking, was that olive oil that you used?
So the recipe calls for olive oil. That would be the most ideal. Right here I have canola oil, which is a nice substitute if you don't have it. You could really use any type of oil, but olive oil is best when it comes to pizza. So the recipe calls for 3 1/4 cup of flour for this. We're just going to add 3 cups to start. We're going to reserve that 1/4 cup just in case the dough is a little too sticky. We don't want to add too much because we don't want the pizza to be too tough in the end. So we're just going to start out with 3. Make sure you level it. That's super important because some people will scoop it out and be like, okay, I got my 3 cups. Like at this point, it's probably like 1 cup and like a 1/4 of a cup, which is not what we want. So we want to make sure we level that off. And we're going to put it in. If you guys don't have all-purpose flour, you could try whole wheat, really whatever flour you got. With flours like whole wheat, you probably don't have to add as much flour. It's a lot drier and it'll soak up a lot more water. So you'll just have to play around with the consistency to make sure you get it where you want. Okay. So now, before going in with our hands, we're going to use the stick or spoon. Question?
Yes, Karen would like to know if you can use self-rising flour.
Yes, that's the same. That'll be fine. Use the same amount. It should be fine. So we're going to just start mixing with whatever utensil you got. Make sure you get the sides. And the dough will start to come together. Okay. You don't want to leave any of that flour on the sides. It's all meant to be in the dough. Okay. So right now, this is what our dough looks like. You can tell that it's a little sticky. When you go in to mix it with your hands, you want it to be tacky. You don't want to go in there and then pull your hands out and all the dough is on your hands. So if you go in and touch the dough at this point, if you think it's a little too sticky, that's where this extra 1/4 cup flour comes in. So we're just going to measure that out. There we go. You don't want to just dump it all in. You just want to sprinkle a little bit across. And then we're going to go in with our hands. At that point, if it is still too sticky for you, add a little more. Little by little. You can always add, you can never take away. Another very important rule I learned in culinary school. So just get in there with your hands, make sure it's all incorporated. It'll start to look like more of a dough and not just a pile of mush when you get in there with your hands. Add a little flour if you need it. Okay. So this looks just about right. So at this point, it definitely looks a lot more like a ball of dough. And you touch it, it's just a little tacky, not too sticky. So we're gonna leave it in this bowl to rest. So just gather it all towards the middle. And then you're gonna take more flour and you're just gonna sprinkle it across the entire surface. So later when we're pulling it out of the bowl, it'll make it a lot easier. I'm just gonna rinse my hands off quick. So we have to let this rest for about 30 minutes. You can use a damp dish towel and put it over the top. I'm gonna use some plastic wrap. It's not my favorite. I feel like I always mess up with this stuff. It always clings to itself. And I just have to throw it out and start again. So just make sure it's completely covered. There we go. And then we're gonna set it aside. So I made a dough before we started, so I can show you how the pizzas are finished. I feel like it's like Food Network when they just whip out like the finished product and you're like, woo! So this dough was made about almost an hour ago. It has come up all the way to the top. If you push it, you feel those air bubbles. And now compared to our little guy, it will grow a lot. So be patient and wait. So we're gonna set him aside. Just gonna clean up my counter.
Toni, quick question while you're cleaning. How long do you set the dough aside? And Karen also asks, should you put it in a dark room?
Okay, so we're letting it rest for about 30 minutes. You want the dough to double in size. So when you're letting it rest, you want to let it rest in a warm place because the yeast loves to warm. When it's in somewhere like a fridge, nothing's gonna grow, it's not gonna work. So since my oven's on right now for the brownies, if you leave it by your oven, it'll help that process and it'll help it double in size. Okay. Just put this back here. So when it comes to pizza, I feel like the ideas are just endless of what you can put on them, what they can look like. Today I just have the usual pizza sauce and cheese. It's a little boring, but you can use absolutely anything. My favorite piece of pizza from my favorite pizza shop, it's penne alla vodka on pizza. Like, who would have thought of that? That's just amazing. Just carbs on carbs. You can use any veggies you have, any leftovers you have in the fridge from the night before. Just throw it on the pizza, and that's it. You could do buffalo slices, which I like also. You can, in place of the pizza sauce, put buffalo sauce, and then chicken and cheese. It's really whatever you got in the fridge, you can make a pizza with. You also don't need traditional pizza dough to make a pizza. We obviously all know pizza bagels. You can do English muffin pizzas. You can use leftover Italian bread that you have that might have gone a little stale. That's perfect to use. Just cut it in half, and there's your pizza dough ready to go. You just pop it in the oven. It is really endless on the ideas that you can make pizza. And I feel like people challenge that every day and make something bigger and better. So when our dough is ready to go, like I said, you feel, if you touch it a little bit, you feel some of those air bubbles decompress. Those air bubbles come from the yeast. When a bubble pops, it's the carbon dioxide that the yeast produce. Kind of cool. Baking is definitely a science. So let me get my pan for this pizza. I just have a regular cookie sheet with parchment that fits. The extra oil that was in the recipe is what they use to grease the pan. But pan spray just works just fine because it's usually oil in here. And like I said before, make sure it's sprayed over the sink. Very important. We don't want anybody slipping. We don't want anybody getting hurt. We also don't want our pizza getting stuck, so we gotta spray the pan. There was one time at school last year, I was in a cakes class, so we were spraying our pans, and one girl didn't listen and sprayed it all over the floor. And my friend was like hurrying through the kitchen, trying to get to the oven, making sure something doesn't burn, and she slipped and fell, which could obviously be so bad, but she was okay. So it was kind of funny, but I made sure she was okay first. That's just a super important example of why we should always spray over the sink, even over the counter. You could always clean it. We don't want it on the floor. So we are going to form our pizza. Always have a little extra flour on hand in case it gets a little sticky. I like to rub it on my hands so my hands are covered. So you're just gonna go and release it from the sides of the bowl. Just use your hands and grab it and release. It's gonna decompress a little bit, but that's okay. So you're just gonna keep going all around, and it should pull off pretty easily. Here we go. And you can put it right on your counter. Like I said, use a little flour just so it doesn't stick. Not too much though. There we go. Don't leave anything behind. So we don't really need to knead it. We're just looking for it to come together really quick. Just fold it over itself a couple times. If it's sticking, that's when you use some flour. And it should look like a nice piece of dough. So like I said, I'm going to split mine in half to make 2 smaller pizzas. So I'm just going to go ahead and rip my dough apart. You don't have to do that. You can make 1 full pizza. So now that I have my 1/2, I am not a professional pizza maker. I cannot throw it and spin it in the air and it'll come out perfect. It'll probably end up on the ceiling if I did that. So what we're going to do is we have our ball. We're going to take it and just start using both of our hands and spinning it at the same time. And it should come out a little round. And then you're just going to place it on your pan here. My parchment tried to run off the tray. And this is when you can use your hands, spread it out even more. Make sure you leave your edges a little thicker for the crust. If you don't like thick crust, you can flatten it out, completely up to you. So just make sure you run your fingers around. If you get any holes, super easy. Just patch it right back up, move some dough. It's very forgiving. If you like your pizza a little thicker, just leave the dough a little thicker. Very simple. Okay.
Coach Toni, we have a question from Pete, and I'm not sure if I understand it, so I'm going to just read it out to you.
Okay.
So flour rises when it bakes. Why does it not rise? Why does not rise and stay fluffy? Like, I guess that might be a science question, Pete.
I know.
I mean, maybe, like, I guess when we're baking it for the pizza, why does it go down? I don't know. That sounds like science.
Well, the pizza, it does rise a little bit, not as much as, say, in the brownie. Obviously, a brownie will rise a little more. And that mainly has to do with leavening agents like baking soda, baking powder. Like, we added the baking powder to the brownies, and that's what makes it rise. There's no leavening in here, so it does rise a little bit, but it's not as much as like a cookie or a brownie. So I think that has a lot to do with it. Okay, I'm just going to rinse my hands quickly, and then we will decorate our pizzas. Okay, let me just check my timer before I get my hands dirty again. I usually never have this perfect timing, but I'm telling you, there was about a minute left in the timer, so I'm just going to check the brownies before we start the pizza. It's just like you're checking a cake or anything. You just use a toothpick, you poke it in the center. If it comes out clean, the brownies are done. If you don't have toothpicks, you can use many things. You can use a knife, a fork, whatever. Just make sure you want to poke it in the middle. The middle is what bakes last. If you say poking on the edge, that's what bakes first. So it's probably going to be done. And then you're like, oh, it's done. And then you cut into it and the middle's not baked all the way. So just make sure you go into the middle. You got a clean toothpick. It's coming out. Perfect. So once your brownies come out of the oven, if you're doing this at the same time as me, we're going to have to raise the temperature of our oven to 425 for these pizzas. So make sure you do that before so it's ready to go. Perfect. So now we're going to finish our pizza. Like I said, I'm pretty boring right now. I'm just going plain. So for the sauce, there's many things you can do.
We have a little bit of a clarification from Pete.
Okay.
Apparently sometimes his pizza comes out, I guess, too hard and he wants to keep it soft. Is it he's making it too thin to start? Maybe I don't.
So there could be a couple different reasons. Being too thin could be one of them. Also, when you're making the dough, if you add too much flour to it, it can make it a lot harder, crunchier, just because of that excess flour. You want the dough to be more tacky. You don't want it to be completely like smooth, soft. You just want it to be a little tacky. So that could be the issue, just too much flour. So we're gonna go ahead with our sauce. You can just use canned pasta sauce, canned tomato sauce, whatever you got in your pantry, unless you have like a very angry Italian grandmother that you have to make homemade sauce for, then make your homemade sauce, but you can use canned if that's all you have. So you take your spoon. You don't want to add too much sauce to this because that's what can make pizza very soggy. You just want to make sure it's just coated and obviously make sure there's room for the crust. We're just going to go in here and just use the back of the spoon or whatever you have to smooth it out. The crust is my favorite part, so I usually leave a thicker crust. Smooth it out there. Even if it doesn't look like enough, oh, that almost fell. It might not look like enough for some people because it's not like completely coated. But once you get that completely coated bottom, that's when it can get very soggy and nobody wants that. So then we're going to add another amazing part of pizza, the cheese. You can go nuts as much as you like. My mom has a saying, there's never enough cheese, so go crazy.
Yeah, I'm jumping in to say more cheese.
Yeah, more cheese. And you can use any sort of shredded cheese you have. Obviously, mozzarella is typical pizza cheese. But if you have cheddar, use that. Really, whatever you have. Even if you don't have shredded cheese and you just have a block of cheese and you don't have a cheese grater, you can always cut it in really little pieces and it does the same exact thing. So that is a little pizza. My oven is not done preheating yet, so I'm just going to leave it on the countertop. And I'm going to wash my hands once again. Super important in the kitchen. You have to wash your hands. It's very, very important when you work in like a restaurant or a bakery. And especially with everything going on right now. Always wash your hands. So then we're going to go back to our brownies. The oven is preheated, so I'm going to throw pizza in there. So depending on the size of your pizza, it can take anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes. And the finish is completely up to you. If you like a pizza more well done, it will take a little longer. But once you see it's what you like, the cheese is just melted, and that crust is a golden brown and it's ready to come out. Make sure your brownies cool before you take them out of the pan. Mine isn't completely cool, but I just want to flip it to show you that you have to peel that parchment paper off before you cut them because you don't want to eat that. Let me get a knife just so we can cut around the edges. And then, I'm sure most of you know this, you just take your knife, trying to get a better angle, and run it along the sides just so it will break away from that side a little bit. You don't need a sharp knife. A butter knife is just fine.
You know, Coach Toni, I just answered a question and then I thought I better double check. You did not put parchment under the pizza, correct?
There is parchment paper under the pizza.
See, I was wrong. I'm glad I asked.
You don't have to do that if you don't have parchment paper. You could always just put it right on the cookie sheet, but it makes for a lot easier cleanup in case it does stick a little bit. But if you're not using parchment paper, you still need to make sure it's greased. So hopefully it doesn't stick. Okay, left side. just gonna get my extra parchment paper from before.
We have Pete here asking, can we put blocks of cheese instead of grating it?
Yeah, anything that you got, any cheese that'll melt will work for pizza. Okay, so hopefully, okay, I think mine might be a little too hot to flip, and that'll end up in a chocolatey mess. But you just run your knife along the edges, really make sure everything is off the edge, and then you can flip it onto a tray, even the counter if your counter's super clean, piece of parchment, tin foil, anything. You want to flip it completely on there when it is cool, so you peel off the parchment so you don't end up eating it. A fun fact, when you're cutting brownies, the best thing to use to cut them is a plastic knife. I couldn't tell you why. It is just the best. I have tried many other, there's like the sharpest knife I have. It always like ruins those edges that you want to look nice. A plastic knife, when it is super cool, it will work great for brownies. If you didn't use parchment on the bottom of these, once it's cool, you don't have to flip it out. You can just go and cut it from there. So that is
A question of my own,
yeah.
Elizabeth. When I try to make brownies, they tend to come out too cakey, and I like them fudgy. What am I doing wrong?
Okay, so when it comes to brownies, obviously everybody has preferences to what they like. These are a little more fudgy brownies. Things that I've read is when you add the eggs, that's what makes it fudgy versus cakey. So if you add a little more egg, it usually comes out a little more cakey, just because you have more substance in there. That is what I've seen. There's probably many other ways to make them a little different. You can always add chocolate chips to your brownies or any other add-ins. Like I know a lot of people like nuts in their brownies. I'm not a fan, but people are. Any other thing, like I said, I think it would be cool to do chocolate, like add in chocolate chips and then use mint extract instead of vanilla. So it's like mint chocolate chip. I think that would be kind of cool. So that is really about it for today. Just like I said, make sure your pizza dough is rising for at least 30 minutes or until it doubles in size. You want it to be fully developed, all that yeast, before you stretch it out. So the dough that we made today, it's already rised quite a bit since we've looked at it last. Still not quite done, but it'll get there. So if anybody has any last minute questions, just ask now. Because the pizza will still take another like 30 minutes to cook, and I don't think we want to like sit here looking at me.
First question from Diane. How long do you cook the pizza?
Okay, so my pizza, since it's split in half, will probably take about 15 minutes. But if you're doing the whole piece of dough on one pizza, I would check it at 25 minutes, rotate it in the oven, and then go from there. Because obviously, if you like it more well done, it will take a little longer. Any other questions?
Yes, I think we have a couple of questions, and I think this is probably to taste, but how thick should the sauce be?
Yeah, that's whatever you want it to be. There's nothing secret special about the sauce. It's whatever you have, or however you like it.
And I'm sorry, you go, Alex.
All right, my bad. I thought we were going back and forth. Should you put the dough in warm over to help it rise?
Oven.
What? Oh, should you put the dough in a warm oven to help it rise? I'm sorry, Harv 0000.
So that can be used. You can do that. You just want to make sure the oven's not too hot. My suggestion with that would be to preheat your oven to like 200 or 250. And when it reaches that point and it's preheated, shut your oven off and then put the dough in there because you don't want it to be too hot. Or like I said, even leaving it by the oven, that residual heat from the oven will help it along.
We're putting like a warm towel over it.
Yeah, if you have like a dish towel and you run it under warmer water and then you just layer over it, that'll help it as well compared to just the plastic wrap. Anything else?
Can we see what the pizza looks like right now, even though it's not done?
Yeah, we'll bring it out. 'Cause I don't think I should bring my laptop by then. So
Oh, it needs more time.
yeah. So it's obviously risen quite a bit already, and it hasn't been in there for that long. But if you touch it, you can tell that that dough is not fully cooked. And I don't think anyone wants to eat that light of a pizza.
I don't know. It still looks pretty good to me.
I'd eat it, but it's not the best.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions? No, I don't think so. I just want to remind everybody that the recipes are on our Facebook page. And this was recorded, so it will be on YouTube for a while if you want to watch it there. Thank you so much, Coach Toni. We love it.
Thank you, Coach Toni.
Thanks for having me. I hope everybody enjoyed, and I hope everybody enjoys their pizza and brownies, because we all need a little bit of that right now.
Absolutely. You couldn't have said it better. Yep. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Cool.